The F1 Championship so far this year in 2021 has been one of the closest season-long battles in the hybrid year that we have ever had. And with 5 rounds still to go, it could get even closer. But exactly how close is the 2021 Championship compared with other years? We're going to be breaking down the 2021 Championship in terms of the points difference between the top 2, who have been leaps and bounds above the rest of the field so far. And then how exactly all of these point gaps compare to other years in Formula One's history. So let's just take a closer look at the current championship of 2021. Here is where it stands after 17 rounds. Max Verstappen is still the championship leader by just 12 points. With the championship lead at round 9 of 33 points, and the championship lead having changed hands 5 individual times. But if we instead plot this 2021 championship graph in terms of the point difference between the top 2, we end up with something that looks a little like this. With that 33-point advantage at round 9 for Max Verstappen being the largest extremity the points gap has seen. Now, in terms of closeness since 2010, when the point system changed from 25 to first all the way down to 1 for 10th, it has basically meant that any championship lead that is greater than 25 points, the number of points for first place, has been considered a comfortable lead in the championship. And then conversely, when you end up scoring 18 for P2, when you have a difference of just 7 points or less, that is considered a close championship lead, where finishing P1 and P2 between you and your title rival has the opportunity to change the championship lead. So if we head back to the points gap between the top 2 and highlight the 25-point region, we see it encompasses every single race bar 1. So excluding this one race at round number 9, the championship lead has never been considered comfortable, where the championship leader could end up retiring and their rival finishing P1 would end up in a switch in the championship lead. Conversely, we can then plot on the 7-point region, which actually encompasses a significant portion of this season, and anything in between this yellow box is considered close. And expressing these two regions in terms of percentages of the races run so far this season, we end up with a graph that looks a little something like this. 94.1% of the races held so far this year have had a championship lead of under 1 race victory's worth of points. And a whopping 53% have been within the difference of P1 and P2. So how exactly does this stack up to the previous turbo hybrid eras? Let's plot on each of those percentages here, where we see that actually 2014 had the largest percentage of races under a victory compared to 2021, with 84%. With the smallest year actually being the year just gone, 2020, with just 17% of the year, with the championship lead being under 1 win. But if we were to have excluded 2021, we could see that this was actually a slowly decreasing trend. And in terms of the points gap between P1 and P2, the only year that comes even remotely close to what we have experienced in 2021 is 2017, with 35% of the races. So that is what 2021 looks like compared to the rest of the turbo hybrid era, but are there any years that have actually had 100% of their races within 1 race victory's worth of points, obviously accounting for the varying different point scores that we have had so far in Formula One's history? So there have actually been 8 seasons in Formula One's history where the gap in the championship has been under 1 win for 100% of the races. And those seasons were 1974, 1964, 2010, 1961, 1956, 1950, the first ever Formula One season, 2008, and 1960. These races have then subsequently been ordered with the highest percentage of races where the points difference was between P1 and P2. With 1974 actually having 80% of the season between the points difference of P1 and P2. So what exactly does the 1974 championship look like when compared to 2021? It was a battle between Emerson Fittipaldi, Clay Regazzoni, Jody Scheckter and Niki Lauda, where 3 of these 4 drivers at one point led the championship. Then again, expressing this graph in terms of the points gap between the top 4, we can plot it on and it looks a bit like this. Where the points for first place in 1974 was 9, which we can see encompasses quite nicely every single race of this season, and the points gap between P1 and P2 was just 3, where there were 3 races outside of this range. So already the 2021 season is not as close as this 1974 epic was, but if we take a look at the flip side, are there any really bad seasons, really dominant seasons in Formula 1, where all of these percentages that we have looked at are actually extremely low rather than extremely high? So on screen now are the bottom 8 seasons, the most dominant seasons in Formula 1, that being 1957, 2009 quite surprisingly, 2004, 2011, 2005, and then joint for the most dominant seasons are 1996, 1992 and 1991, both sharing 12.5% of the races between a race victory and a DNF, and 6.25% where the races were between P1 and P2. And taking a look at the 1996 battle between Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve, this is what the championship graph looked like across the entire season. And then once again, expressing this in terms of a points difference between the two drivers, plotting it on, it looks a little like this, where it extended all the way up to 25 points at round number 9, before slowly coming back down near the end of the season. And in 1996, you achieved 10 points for a race victory, and this encompasses just 2 races, round number 1 by default, and then round number 15 near the end of the season. And then once again, the difference between P1 and P2 only encompasses round number 1 by default. So we've just taken a look at the closest and the least closest Formula 1 seasons of all time. But where exactly does every single season in Formula 1 sit? So what I have done is I've added up both the percentages that we have so far looked at in this episode to create a cumulative score for that year. And on screen is the order for all of the years in Formula 1's history, including the current season 2021, with 147% that we are currently living through at this moment in time, as we slowly rock down the competitive seasons all the way down into the least competitive seasons, with 2013 having just 52%, all the way down into the least competitive seasons, which we have taken a look at in a closer detail, like 1996. And now knowing each season's cumulative percentage, we can actually take a look at how close each decade was. So on screen now is the order of the close decades. The 1980s produced the closest championship battles in Formula 1's history. Then the 1960s, then the current 2020s that we are living through, bear in mind there have just been 2 seasons, then the 2010s, 1950s, 1970s, 1990s, and 2000s. So even though there is just 1 completed season and 1 ongoing season in the 2020s, it is the 3rd most competitive season so far in Formula 1. But if we just take a closer look at 1980 overall, here is a breakdown of each of the seasons. And we can see at the very beginning of the decade over on the right hand side, we had 4 extremely competitive seasons overall, with the most competitive season actually coming in the latter half, 1986. However, the trend that is observed over this decade is that as it progresses, the competitiveness decreases. And if we just take a look at the second closest decade, 1960, we can again see an extremely similar trend. We start off the decade with extremely close seasons, we then have an extremely competitive season in the middle, and actually we had a competitive season towards the end. But once again, as the decade progresses, we have a decreasing trend in competitiveness. However, if we compare this to what we have observed so far this decade, it is quite the opposite. We have had 1 extremely dominant year in 2020, and right next to it, we have had an extremely close year. And there we go, there is how close 2021 has so far been compared to all other years in Formula 1's history. If you have got any questions about today's video, please do let me know in the comments down below. But what is your thoughts on this year? Do you think it's going to get any closer, or do you think it's going to get further away? And do you think in this decade, with the new 2022 regulations, that we're going to see more closer championship fights, or are they going to get further away? But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.